Well, hey, if you don't know me, I'm Kade, creator of Collaborate Worship, and today I'm joined by Chad Kirkpatrick with Ascension Worship. It's always an honor to collaborate with Chad, so let's jump right in. In this video, we're going to talk about avoiding burnout. As a church volunteer or staff member, a lot is expected of you, and if you don't set some boundaries, you're going to find yourself resenting the fact that you ever got involved in the first place. We want to help you keep that from happening. We've both suffered from burnout, so we invite you to learn from our mistakes today. Chad, tell us your burnout story.
Well, when I think I might have mentioned this last time I was on the channel, but a few years ago, I went to Hillsong College, which is an amazing college, by the way, and apparently they are back open after COVID now. But they don't let you do anything for the first 6 months, which is a really smart thing. They want you to kind of figure out who you are and build your character up properly. But after that 6 months is over, it's like a boom of like, hey, we need you to do this, and this. And I'm a bass player as well. So they wanted me to play bass. They wanted me to run sound. It was just like, it was an explosion of fun. But if I'm not careful, it's really, really easy to burn out in an environment like that. So one thing that I got really lucky on was that first 6 months, I kind of fell into this elective course that they have. It's called Boundaries. It's actually based off of a book called Boundaries by, I think his name is Dr. Henry Cloud. Very, very worth purchasing, especially if you have a team of people to share with. But basically it teaches you to say no to certain things so that you can guarantee you can say yes to other things. So this is a long story of me just saying that when that first 6 months ended, I had like these opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and it was starting to get to be a bit too much. And there was one day I remember really clearly where this one extension service, now this is at Hillsong, but this was the last Hillsong campus that they had that still had an analog board. And they wanted me for a youth night to play bass and run sound at the same time. And I was like, no, like I'm putting my foot down. The answer is no, because I knew that if I did it, that I would never want to serve at that campus again because it would be so incredibly stressful. And the guy who was scheduling people for that event, really, really great guy. But he's like literally begging me to come do this. And I'm like, no, like the answer is no. And it's not only for me, but for you, because it's not going to be a good end result. Like I'll come and run sound because I know that's in this particular instance more important. But if I say yes to this now, you will never have me there again. Like I'll be done. So for my mental health and yours, the answer is no. And in the end, it ended up working out perfect. He gave the opportunity to a different bass player who wouldn't have had that opportunity if I had said yes. And then I was able to relax a little bit more, and it went well. It was all fine. If I had said yes, that would have been the easy thing for him in that moment, but it would have been bad for both of us in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I've heard somebody say, I don't know who said it, but for every yes is 1,000 no's behind that yes. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah. Well, one thing I started doing was keeping like multiple calendars, the same calendar, but like different color codings, I guess you could say. And that was one thing that I learned from that was certain calendars had more priority over others. And so like you would have to say no to certain things because they wouldn't fit in with the others basically.
Yeah, I remember there was a time where my default answer to somebody asking me to do something would be yes. And I read a book like that Boundaries book and a few others that turned that around. And my default answer is always no now. And you have to convince me for a yes. And that one thing shifted a lot of things for me.
Oh, wow.
But when you're, say you're just getting started serving in church, I remember that years ago. I mean, it's so exciting. And I mean, you get to do something for God, right? You're like, yes. And since you're serving God, you feel like you're invincible. You can just say yes to every opportunity to serve. And the problem is, if you don't set boundaries, burnout is in the horizon. So Chad, is it okay to say no to an opportunity to serve at church?
Absolutely. that you're exactly right about, especially the excitement part of it when you first do it. It's kind of like if you ever took like a high school weightlifting class, and there's always that one idiot in the class who he can bench press 100 pounds, and then the next day he tries to do 200, and now he can't do anything because he hurt himself. And I think it's okay to work within your limits, to say no to certain things. Always try to still be growing. Like, it'd be silly for him to, only ever lift 100 pounds, but to go from 100 to 200 is silly, but to go from like 100 to like 110 is just going to be, good for you in the long run.
Yeah. But if somebody asks me at church to do something, like, don't I have to do it? I mean, it's ministry after all.
Yeah. This is where things get complicated, because you have to kind of set your boundaries early on. And like it's tricky because you don't want to put your church in a position where like they're in trouble because you're not there. But you also, especially if you're a leader of a team, you have to think about that now. Like, while you're not about to be burned out, you have to start training other people. You have to start telling people your boundaries ahead of time. So when it is the night before, it's not going to be a surprise that, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Or no, I'm not going to pick up my phone at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. You need to create situations where your leaders know, I have to have this planned out beforehand, because sometimes Chad says no to things, and that starts early on.
Yep, that's true. You gotta set the expectation, because really it's only hard for people to accept boundaries if you haven't had any beforehand. But all those people that we know that you can't, all those people that you can't, call them on Saturday or interrupt their family time or something like that. You don't even try, because you already know what the answer is going to be. So, man, Chad, that's such a powerful point.
100%. Well, and also too, as a leader, sometimes you have to impose boundaries on the people underneath you. So like, and those can be boundaries that they've told you that they want. Or sometimes you have to be forward thinking enough for them, especially if they're young, to lead them into certain boundaries. And so like, I'll give you a good example. I was helping out another church the other day, and there's a new production manager working there, and she had been working for like 2 weeks straight with no days off. And she was happy to do that, but her, creative director or whoever it was, I don't know the titles, that was above her, made her take the next day off. And she didn't want to, but he's like, no, you have to. You haven't had a day off in 10 days. And that is like such great leadership on his part, because he saw the potential. Even though she's not at burnout now, if she keeps going like this, she will burn out, and it won't be healthy for her, and it won't be healthy for the church. So he imposed on her a boundary to teach her, how to avoid burnout early on. And that's just amazing leadership.
Yeah. And I know, I bet he did that because he's suffered burnout himself, and he probably recognized himself in that moment, right?
I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, hey, I'm going to press pause on this conversation real quick just to ask you, if you're enjoying this video, will you go ahead and hit that like button on YouTube? That just helps this video get out to everybody else who needs it. So thanks. Go ahead and give this video a like. All right, back to the conversation. What do healthy boundaries look like?
Well, I think you have to have me time in there. So I'm always asking people like, hey, Kade, what's your Kade time look like? What do you do to relax? And one thing that I learned early on was that you have to put that in your calendar somewhere. And that's gonna be different for everybody. Like, some people, more extroverted people probably want to go out and do something silly, like, go cliff hiking or something, and for like a guy who's more introverted like me, sometimes I need like a day off just to watch something on Netflix and not, be at the church for just a little while. And one thing that I learned, back to being at Hillsong, the pastor of Hillsong Australia, so a high position up there, He came in and did a class, and I don't know what he was actually talking about, but somewhere in the class, he started talking about keeping a calendar, and his name's Joel. And he said that sometimes he puts in his calendar Tuesday, 2 p.m., golf with Joel. And when someone asked him, like, hey, can you do this thing on Tuesday at 2 p.m., if he didn't want to do it, he'd say, oh, I have an appointment already at 2 p.m. And he doesn't have to say the appointment is with Joel. Why should it matter? Like, why would it be any less important if it's with Joel or with anybody else? And he always had the option to cancel his own appointments if he wanted to. But he would create time in his calendar that was Joel time. And then at night, I forget what his cutoff was, but it was like, 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night. If he got a call from anyone that wasn't his kids, his wife, or in his case, he allowed for his senior pastor. If it wasn't one of those phone numbers, he would hit decline and say, we'll talk about it in the office tomorrow. And I remember when he said that, the people in the classroom audibly gasped, because like their whole time in college at this point, they thought, not because of anything the college said, but just because of their own ambitious selves, they thought you say yes to everything if you want to get to the position of being this guy who's like second to the senior pastor at Hillsong Church. And for him to say that he takes time off and sometimes he doesn't answer phone calls right away, like was like to them. And a lot of those people went to college when they were like 18. And at this point I was like 28 and I'd seen people had burned out myself. And so for me, it was like, well, yeah, I mean, like that's, that's the only way you're going to survive in the long haul is to take breaks, otherwise you're not going to want to do this whole thing of church at all. And sure enough, some of those people I remember now that were in that class that were like blown away by that, some of them have burned out and left the church, and it's really unfortunate. So like, you really have to think, is me coming in an extra day for this rehearsal that's like, when this service is over, like it's going to be replaced by another service. Like there's always something happening at the church. Like for me, that situation, like I could have said yes and played bass, but it would have been bad for me in the long run to do so. And like years later, I'm still in ministry. And I think part of it's because I said no to certain things and was able to last where other people just gave up.
When it comes to church sound, another reason we struggle to set boundaries is because of the amount of time it takes to get things right at the mixer. Without the right training, it takes way more time than it needs to get the right mix. And that's why I created Church Sound Made Simple. This stress-free online training will help you create a team where everybody is confident in their mixing skills and the results are consistent each week. Get access today by visiting churchsoundmadesimple.com. Yeah, man, this takes me back to when I was a teenager at my first job, which actually was my second job, at a gas station called Quick Trip here in Oklahoma. And the expectation from them was you work whatever day we ask you to work. And I was like, well, I don't work on Sundays. They're like, you're going to have to. And I'm like, I don't work on Sundays. And so lo and behold, my first week there, guess what they did? They scheduled me on a Sunday. And I just went up to him. I said, I already told you guys, I set the expectation before you hired me that I don't work on Sundays and I will not be here on Sunday. And they said, okay, we'll never schedule you on a Sunday again. And that was the end of it. They never scheduled me on a Sunday ever again. And I kept the job. And it's funny because we think I'm going to lose my job if I actually set this boundary and stick to this boundary, but it's unlikely.
If you give them that first Sunday, the give an inch, take a mile, like even if it's not like in the church world, it's not that people are actively trying to ruin your life or suck you dry of, your ability to serve, but it's easier, in that case with the youth pastor, scheduling people, it was easier for him to get this one guy that he knew could play bass and knew could run sound than to actively look for another bass player. And that was just the easy path for him. It wasn't the right path, but it was easy. But yeah, if you give in and start, saying yes to everything, you're going to resent the church. And that's the worst possible position you can be in. You don't want to get to that point.
Or a healthy boundary that I've set in my life, which was a hard one to do, is we have Sabbath and it's on Mondays just because That's just the day we chose because it's the day that worked for our family. And on Sabbath, I don't look at my phone. I don't check my email. You can't get a hold of me. Nobody can find me. It's just a day with my family. And I mean, at first, I can remember I have some clients that I do some video work for, and they're like, so you're not going to answer us on Monday? I was like, no. And the next week, so you didn't answer me on, why didn't you answer me? Because it's my Sabbath. For real? Yeah, for real. And eventually they grab a hold of it. And now, I mean, I'm the pastor at our church now. And so I've even told my church and explained the importance of Sabbath and explained how our Sabbath works. And so they all know my Sabbath is on Monday and they can't get a hold of me on Monday. If you need something from me, you're not going to find me on Monday. You're going to have to ask me on Tuesday. What if it's a family emergency? Call 911. Like, I'm not the emergency doctor, right? But that's the only day that's like that. There's just a hard boundary around my Monday. Nobody's getting in. Any other day of the week, reach out. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can.
You only have to do it a couple times and people will learn your boundaries. And if they're any kind of leader, they'll respect those boundaries. Like, it doesn't take but once or twice and then you're fine. And people will learn that even though it's easier to call you on a Saturday at 11 o'clock for something that's probably really silly, if they, once they have it in their head that I can't get to that point, like there's a boundary in front of that, then it's going to change the way they operate and they'll know to reach out to you earlier instead. And then it's going to make them a better person. It's going to make you a happier pastor. And then everyone's good in the end, like unless someone's, it's hard to even think of an emergency that would be big enough to get over that. But again, it's that path of least resistance. People want to do what's easy, and that's not good in the long run.
Yeah. I've learned that what people feel like is an emergency rarely is. It's rare. And when you think about it, it's like I'm with my family on Mondays, and what's the emergency that I'd have to tend to? It'd be with my family if something happened with one of my kids or with my wife or something like that. That's it. Anybody else, it's like they have other family members or things like that that can take care of them. So I don't know. Some people probably think it's heresy for a pastor to be like, yeah, you ain't going to find me on Monday, because most pastors are just on all the time. Like, I'm here for your every need, but man, that's not healthy. So if there's any pastors listening right now, you should consider some boundaries.
Well, I had another interesting story. This is something I've heard from somebody else, but it's a pastor who comes in when the church is like in crisis. And what he does, like if your senior pastor is about to quit, or there's a big break happening, like he comes in and he's pretty fascinating because he'll do all the things that aren't politically correct. Like he'll like basically redo all the church's bylaws and like change things, I could go all day about some of the stuff he does. A really interesting character. But one of the first things that he does with pastors that are like on the breach of burnout is he'll have them do like set a timer every like 20 minutes, I think it is. And every 20 minutes when your phone goes off, you make a note of what you're doing. And he had this one pastor do that and then send him, the list, over 3 days, what all did he do? And he calculated it and it's like, of the stuff you sent me, 75% of the times that timer went off, you were on your phone and you were either texting, calling, or emailing. And that included, after business hours, office hours would probably be the better word for church world, was when he was doing these things. And so simply the pastor said, okay, well, you're going to put these filters on your email and on your texting, and you're not going to respond to calls past 5 o'clock, and you're not going to, do this, this, and this. And he put these restrictions on. And then that ended up basically curing the burnout of this pastor. Was just, hey, in fact, I think I remember the rule was, so he'd come in at 9 a.m. The first 2 hours of his day were study time. And then from 11 p.m. until like 4:45, his phone was open for people to call and email and all that kind of stuff. Anything past that point got rolled over to the next day. And that was the solution.
Those are some good, healthy boundaries. I like that.
Well, I mean, because you're right. Like it's dangerous. The phone, I mean, like this is everything. It's your personal life, it's your family life, it's your, play games, it's your work life, it's everything. And if you're not really careful, like, you're always looking at it, and it's easy to slip out of relaxation mode into panic mode over something that you shouldn't be in panic over, if you don't know when to say no.
Yeah. Well, man, don't tell anybody this, but my phone is almost always on Do Not Disturb.
Love it. Love it.
One more question for you, man. So say somebody who's watching right now and they're like, crap, I've never set a boundary in my life. And so now the worship leader or the tech team leader or whatever team you're serving on, they just expect you to do everything because you're the guy or the girl that always says yes. So how does that person communicate with their leader some boundaries?
Okay, so 2 thoughts on this. One, like I think you should have a real conversation, with those people and say, hey, I'm starting to impose these boundaries, don't be surprised when I say no to something. What you don't want to do is just spring it on them, and like if they're used to calling you at 11 on Saturday because you never made that a boundary before, and then all of a sudden you don't respond, you're going to put them into crisis mode. But the other thing too is, as a responsible leader, getting back to that like path of least resistance thing, it's easier for us, especially production people that tend to be more introverted and tend to be, I don't know what the word would be, but like, it's easier for me to do it. Like you hear that phrase all the time. I'll just do it. It's easier for me to do it than to try and explain to you how to do it. That's not good leadership. If you can start training people underneath you so that when you're not available for that random funeral on Tuesday, it doesn't have to be you. You say, hey, this is a good opportunity for, Jack over here who has been wanting to learn sound. He's ready to go. He can run sound for that funeral. And I found that, again, that path of least resistance thing, like if you know that, let's say that you rate your own abilities at 90%, like I'm 90% happy with my mix, there's always, hopefully you don't think you're 100% because there's always more to learn. But that like, okay, well, putting that volunteer who's been wanting to learn in there is going to drop us down to like 60% for a few weeks. Like in the immediate, you've just dropped in quality, but in the long run, if you get him up to 90% as well, then you're going to be at 90% almost all the time, because even if you can't be there, you've got someone else that can be there with the same skills and abilities you have. But that takes looking down the road and letting go of some things and being okay with a short-term drop in quality for a more long-term raise in quality. But again, the path of least resistance, you have to make a plan to do that.
Man, that's such good stuff. Everybody should take that to heart. It's hard to, hand it over to somebody that's not going to do it as good as you. But I think it's Craig
no one can do
Rochelle.
it as good as you.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Wow, we're full of ourselves, right? I think it was Craig Rochelle that I've heard say exactly what you just said. It's like, if they can do it at least half as good as you can do, let them do it. Let them do it. Well, thanks, Chad, for sharing your wisdom on this topic. If you want to hear Chad and I talk about creating a thriving team, click the video on your screen or click the link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to see future videos like this. We'll see you next time.